What is their yellow zone? And then the red zone is when the child is actually screaming at you. They're having a full-blown tantrum attack, wherever it is, public, private. And this is the moment where you're going to have a volcano erupting inside of you. This is where you need to trigger your own coping strategies. And if you don't have any, you need to get some ASAP, because this is where the blame game starts. This is when you start shaming your child. This is when you start, disciplining and taking everything away. If you don't listen to me, if you don't stop right now, I'm putting you on timeout and I'm taking away your electronics for a year. Well, part of the problem is you need to take away your child's electronics because their brain is on overload. So what you need to do, especially if you're operating from a crisis or survival mode, you're constantly going to be in your own red zone. So what you need to do is identify and go, okay, in a red zone, and I could talk about this forever, and I teach this in my Teach Your Kids to Meditate program, but in a child's red zone, you cannot solve any problems. So if your child is tantruming and you can tell, do not say, stop yelling at me, go on timeout. You need to just get them in a safe zone. So if they're kicking and screaming, you're like, okay, take away other people so that they're not kicking those people. Let the child calm down. If you have to, and I actually say don't use force on the child because that's just going to make it worse, because then they're just going to kick back. They might bite, but just walk away if you can, depending on the child's age. Walk away. If you're in a store, oh my goodness, we all seen it in the store where the parent is screaming and yelling at the child to stop and the child won't stop. Just physically take the child's hand or pick up the child and leave the store. Yep. Leave your groceries in the middle of the aisle. The child is in a red zone. Remember, a child is learning how to self-regulate. So we have to learn how to cope with these strategies and be embarrassed at the same time, because that's exactly what's happening. But what the aim is once you get to understand your kids more, routine, boundaries, coping strategies, you're going to end up living more in your yellow and your green zones. And that's where you have to do the daily practices. That's where you have to do your own eating, your own lifestyle shifts. And once you do that, you don't enter the red zone as much. So I talk a lot about, on the podcast, I'm starting to talk about it a little bit, of a no yelling summer, meaning just observing how often we're yelling at our kids. And I haven't been keeping track, but I do know we went on a week-long vacation where we were stuck and I say stuck, we weren't stuck. We were in an RV together. It was me, my husband, and our 3 kids. And I did not yell once. I got upset once and I was getting a little frustrated, but I diffused it very quickly. And for me, that's like a game changer, because I used to be a very angry parent. So, there's a lot tied up into that question, and I could literally talk about it forever, but I find that the red, green, and yellow zones is a good indicator for people of, where am I, I don't even understand what zone I'm in. And I'm trying to solve all my life problems and my child's behavior in the red zone. And I never actually live in my green zone. And that's kind of the cultural epidemic of parenthood.
That's such a good point. And I feel like you're so right about when you get in that like stressed out your own red zone and you're at your own limit. And that's when you're like, why did you do that? Or you're yelling or you're making unreasonable consequences that you don't actually even want to carry out because they're as much of a punishment for you as the child. But it's easy, I think, for parents to fall into that. I'm certainly not shaming or guilting anyone for that. I've been there too. But I'm curious. So part of it, I get totally like working on ourselves and working through that and acknowledging things like, probably our lives, our minds have never been changed by someone yelling at us and telling us we were doing it wrong. And the same is certainly true for children. So then once you've removed from the red zone and you've worked on your own anger and your own temper, what are some of the ways that you can then apply a more positive and mindful parenting when they're more in the green and yellow?
Yes. So I always say return back to the conversation when you're both in your green zone. Sometimes this takes a really long time with a stubborn child or a stubborn parent. This is not a one and done thing. This is a mindset shift. So, example, depending on the child's abilities and, emotional intelligence and cognitive, but even a small child will understand what you're talking about. So let's just say I take my 5-year-old, for example, and he has a tantrum in the grocery store. And I remove him. We go back home. I'm like, hey, honey, grocery shopping did not happen today. We need to get it ordered, or I got to go back by myself. we're ordering a pizza for dinner. It's just not happening. He's like, okay, whatever. And then when my son is, he's had his pizza, life is good. I see he's happy. He's playing again. I'm going to say, hey, honey, what happened in the grocery store? And he might go, oh, I was so angry. He might tell you what he was feeling, or he might shut down and go, I don't know. But the point is that you return back to it, because culturally we teach our children that emotions are bad, that feelings are bad, and they're not. They're just feelings. And it's called emotional intelligence, right? Being able to control yourself emotionally. So understand that this is something that children will learn as they grow. But I always say, come back to it. And you will learn so much about your child through that process. So a lot of my clients will learn that their child actually is a very sensitive child. And you don't necessarily need a diagnosis. So the first thing people do is they run to the doctors and they go, what's wrong with my kid? What's wrong with my kid? But they're not changing any of their approaches. They're not changing how they talk to their children. They're not changing their energy. They're not changing the lifestyle, because there's so much chaos in the house. And they're not realizing that chaos, that energy, even clutter in a child's bedroom can affect their health and how they feel in that space. It's like, put yourself in the child's shoes. Do you feel gross when you're in a state of clutter? Of course you do. So they have anger, they have anxiety, and they just don't know how to express it. So going back and asking your child, what's up? What are you doing? What was that? And just being very curious and conversational with them will open your eyes, and they might go, I don't know. They might not know, and most likely they won't know, but your child might be very sensitive, and realizing that is part of who they are. So then you have to kind of intervene and say, how can I create more space for my child to just be? One thing I noticed today, we're on summer here, so all 3 boys are home, and my mom took them for a night, and she dropped them off today. And my youngest is highly introverted and barely talks. Like, he's so quiet, and he loves Legos, and he loves playing by himself. And he also, loves playing with other people, but he was with his brothers for 48 hours straight. They were in a hotel room, and he came home, and the first thing he did was went to his bedroom. So the old me would have went in his room and said, what's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? Come out, come out, come out. And he goes, nothing, Mom. I'm just playing. And I was like, okay, this child just created his own boundary and went in his room to get some quiet space, had his stuffed animal, and he was just, playing, imagining, because he was overstimulated and he needed space and he needed rest. So if we're not giving these things to ourselves, I always say we are our child's greatest teacher. We are their coach. We are their guide. And if we don't have the tool in our own toolbox, we're not going to understand what's going on with our children. Every day they're teaching me something else. And, if I have a belief that staying in your room is bad because as a child, I've associated that with punishment. My son is isolating himself in his room. I'm like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with him? Because it did pop up for a second, and then I caught it, and he's like, I just need to rest. And I'm like, okay, that's awesome. You can self-regulate. So we really need to ask our kids, what's going on inside your body and what's going on inside your mind? And the more we get to know about them, the more we can help them cope.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's an important point that applies across all aspects of our life and parenting especially. But I feel like, at least from my perspective, a lot of times we don't give kids enough credit, and we don't understand how much they're capable of understanding and working through and being educated on. I know from my background in nutrition, that's one thing I tell parents a lot is we underestimate kids so often and how much they can understand about nutrition and how they can actually make great choices when we give them the building blocks to do that. And we instead assume that they just want to eat chicken nuggets and pizza, and that's the only thing on kids' menus, and then we're timid as parents to offer them anything different because that's what the expectation is. And I feel like the same is true in parenting. We sometimes underestimate how emotionally capable they can be, or at least if we let them and give them the building blocks, how they can work through that. And I think that respectful and mindful parenting is how we would want to be talked to if we were upset. And it's only logical that we should do the same for our children. But I know one of the follow-up questions that may be on some people's minds are, that's great. So don't talk to them. Don't work through that stuff when everybody's upset. That's a great lesson. But how do you get them to do the things they do need to do when they are in the green zone and they have chores and they're resisting that kind of stuff? What's your approach there?
Boundaries and expectation and rules. and respect. So following through with a boundary is key. So example, it's summertime. If I want to get, like I'm manipulating him, but if one of the rules in our home is to tidy your room, right? Some other people might say that's not an issue here. I've co-created a lot with my children, meaning like, hey, bud, you're not just sitting around all day doing nothing. What are you going to do this summer? Let's come up with a plan. So we came up with a morning routine, right? Morning routine was you get out of bed. I'm not going to push you out of bed, but you're definitely not sleeping until noon. You don't really have a lot of access to your phone or other electronics, but if you do want some access, you have to get up. You have to take a shower, brush your teeth. You have to eat because he won't eat. And then you have to do a chore, and then you can have access to your phone. The reason why I use the phone for the access is because that is the only currency that he is motivated by. He's not motivated by much else, and most teens are only motivated by screen time currency. So that's what we utilize. For smaller children, it's more of holding that boundary and being in that state and owning the discomfort that the child is experiencing. So holding space for that child while they're dealing with their own resistance. So Katie, tell me one thing you've done that you've resisted, but you had to get it done.
Oh gosh, let's see. Every time I have to go, like the laundry gets backed up and there's like 9 loads and I don't want to do it.
Yeah. But you have to get it done, right? And you have this like physical response, this mental response, and like you have probably a little tantrum going on in your brain, right?
Oh, totally. I think, yeah, the total mom tantrum. And then you're going to catch up and it's going to be done for 12 seconds anyway.
Yes. So, but you realize what this resistance looks like in your body. So a lot of tantrums that our children have are actually just resistance. And in order to push through that, we have to get ourselves really uncomfortable. So if I say to my 8-year-old, okay, what do you want your chore to be? And he's like, feeding the dogs. Great. Awesome. Okay. It comes time to feed the dogs. And then he's doing his like Oscar winning cry, right? Like, poor me, I don't want to do it. And it's just hilarious. He can turn it on and off just like that. And I'm becoming non-reactive. So I'm sitting there, we've practiced it. I'm like, oh, here it comes. Now I just expect it that he'll have his little show. Sometimes he doesn't anymore though. And I just ignore it. And I go, cool, awesome. It's time to feed the dogs. Don't want to feed the dogs? We don't move on to the next step. You don't get computer time. You don't get whatever. We're not going to be able to go swimming. So it's like you can resist it all day. You can sleep in all day if you want, but you're never going to get that phone. You didn't do the chore today. So no, you're not going to be able to text your friends. So it's like allowing your child to take responsibility for some of their actions and really holding that boundary and helping them co-create what it is that they want to do. So instead of being so controlling and like, do this, do this, do this, do this, go, well, what would you like to do? How can we work this out together? And of course, it's age appropriate.
I love that word, co-create. And in our family, we've done a little bit similar of an approach, and we have a family manifesto that we came up with together that kind of just talks about the things that we all believe and love in our family and how we approach conflict and how we work together. And part of that is that we all share the responsibility of living in the household, because it's not that like I am the like innkeeper for these 7 other people who live in my house. They all live here too. We're all contributing. And so, like you said, there's expectations that come with that and chores that are part of that. And I don't get paid or bribed or in any way, taught to do those chores. I have to just cook because everybody needs to eat, and it is what it is. And it's part of being the family. And I feel like with my kids, one thing that's been really helpful in that is just respecting their independence. For one, we have one part of our manifesto is that we don't do things for our kids that they're capable of doing themselves, because we respect them as autonomous children and that they can do it. And then the other part of that is that they are required to contribute, and we let natural consequences kind of come in without us yelling or screaming, but natural consequences. So for instance, everybody of my kids from 5 years up, so not the baby, but the rest of them, can do their own laundry. So I don't do their laundry. And if they run out of clothes, it's a perfect natural consequence because they have nothing to wear. Things like that. I don't have to yell. And when they're out of clothes, it's like, well, why are you out of clothes? Did you do your laundry? And then that's a lesson that's easier than me teaching or yelling or nagging or bribing them to do it. They learn themselves. And that's a perfect example for adulthood, because what happens if I don't do my laundry? I don't have clothes. So that's how we've kind of worked it in our family. And it seems like you guys